Imagine sitting at your own family dinner table, surrounded by the people you love most, only for your husband to walk in with another woman and introduce her as his special friend. That was my life, and I can still remember the way the air left the room when it happened. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily. I've been married to Jason for 12 years. Together, we have 2 children, a boy and a girl, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect family. I always believed in Jason. I trusted him completely. I thought we were building something strong, something lasting. I put him and our kids above everything else. My world revolved around keeping our home warm, our family close, and making sure everyone had what they needed. Jason and I met when I was still in college. He had this charm that could light up a room, and back then, I thought he was the man I had been waiting for all my life. We built a life step by step, through small apartments, tight budgets, and eventually the house we live in now. We raised our children with love, celebrated birthdays and holidays, and faced the ups and downs together. Or at least, I thought we did. I worked hard to keep things steady. While Jason focused on his career, I managed the household. I cooked, cleaned, helped with homework, and made sure our kids felt safe and loved. There were times when it wasn't easy, but I didn't complain. I believe that's what a wife does. She supports, she nurtures, she keeps things together. That was my role, and I accepted it fully. Looking back now, I can see the small ways he started to pull away. Little comments that didn't matter much at the time. Excuses about long hours at the office. Coming home later and later, sometimes missing dinner completely. But even when my instincts whispered that something was wrong, I silenced them. I told myself I was overthinking, that stress from work was making him distant. I never stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt. I thought loyalty meant believing in your spouse even when things seemed uncertain. I thought love meant trusting even when you couldn't explain the changes you saw. That's the woman I was, someone who held on, who kept pouring her energy into her marriage because I believed it would always be worth it. Jason was my partner, my best friend, the father of my children. I couldn't imagine him being anything else. That's why what happened that night felt like a knife to my chest. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the destruction of everything I had built my life around. And it all started at a dinner table, in front of the people I loved most. It started slowly, almost in ways I could excuse. Jason began staying late at work more often. At first, I believed him. His job was demanding, and I told myself he was just working hard to give our family a better life. But over time, it became a pattern that I couldn't ignore. Dinner would be ready, the kids and I would sit waiting, and Jason wouldn't show up until much later, sometimes long after the children had gone to bed. When he did come home, he wasn't the same. He stopped asking about my day, and he barely listened when the kids tried to share their stories from school. It was as if he was in the same house, but miles away from us emotionally. I tried to brush it off at first, thinking maybe he was just tired. But the warmth I used to see in his eyes was gone. He looked at me like I was just part of the furniture, not the woman who had shared his life for over a decade. Family traditions that once mattered to him started to mean nothing. Every Friday, we used to have a movie night with the kids. He would bring snacks and pick the movie, and the kids loved it. But suddenly, he had no time for it. Birthdays, anniversaries, even small moments that used to bring us joy, Jason stopped caring. On our last anniversary, I cooked his favorite meal and set up a quiet evening after the kids went to bed. He came home late, barely touched the food, and said he was too tired to celebrate. He didn't even look me in the eye when he said it. I put in so much effort to keep things normal, to hold on to the routines that made us feel close as a family. I kept cooking his favorite meals, planning outings with the kids, and trying to make the house a warm place for him to come back to. But no matter what I did, Jason seemed to drift further away. He wasn't just tired, he was indifferent. That cut deeper than I could explain. My gut told me something was wrong. A wife knows when her husband's heart isn't at home anymore. I noticed the way he guarded his phone, the way he suddenly cared more about his appearance before leaving the house, the faint smell of cologne that wasn't the one he usually wore. All the signs were there, but I tried to push them away. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself over and over that I was imagining things, that it was just stress, that he still loved me deep down. The truth was I was scared. Scared of what it would mean if I was right. Scared of what it would do to our children. So, I stayed quiet, swallowed my doubts, and convinced myself that the man I married would eventually come back to me. But deep down, I already knew something had shifted, and it wasn't going to shift back. Every year, my family gathered at our home for a special dinner. It was a tradition I looked forward to, one that brought everyone together in the same room. My parents, my brother, my sister, and their families. No matter what was happening in life, this dinner had always been a moment to pause and feel grateful for one another. I wanted this year to be the same, maybe even better, because I secretly hoped it would remind Jason of the family we had built and the love we once shared. I started preparing early in the morning. I pulled out recipes I knew by heart, ones I had made countless times before. I roasted chicken the way Jason liked, creamy mashed potatoes with extra butter, a fresh green bean casserole, and his favorite apple pie for dessert. I wanted him to walk into the house, smell the food, and feel like he belonged here, with me. The kids were excited, helping me set the table. They folded napkins the way their grandmother had taught them and placed the silverware neatly beside each plate. The house smelled warm and inviting. Laughter filled the kitchen as my parents arrived, followed by my brother and sister. Everyone was in high spirits, hugging, chatting, catching up. It felt almost perfect, except for the empty chair at the head of the table. Jason had promised me he would be home on time. I reminded him of the dinner more than once during the week, and he nodded, saying he wouldn't miss it. I wanted to believe him. But as the minutes turned into an hour, I kept glancing at the door, my heart sinking lower each time it stayed closed. My family noticed too. They didn't say anything at first, but I caught the looks. My father cleared his throat, trying to keep the conversation light. My mother gave me a small smile, one that tried to comfort me without words. I forced myself to laugh at my brother's jokes, to keep the mood from turning heavy, but inside I was restless. Finally, I decided to hold off on serving until Jason arrived. The food sat hot on the table, steam rising, filling the air with rich smells, but I couldn't bring myself to start without him. It was supposed to be a family dinner, and even after everything, I wanted him there. I wanted us to look like a whole family, at least for one night. The kids asked where their dad was, and I told them he was on his way. I said it with a smile, but my stomach twisted with doubt. Every passing moment reminded me that his promises no longer carried the weight they once did. When the door finally opened and Jason walked in, it wasn't the relief I had been waiting for. It was the beginning of a moment that would change everything. The door finally opened, and every head at the table turned toward it. Jason walked in, but he wasn't alone. My breath caught in my chest when I saw his hand wrapped tightly around another woman's. She was younger, with long dark hair and a polished smile, dressed as though she had stepped out of a magazine. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Jason acted as if nothing was out of the ordinary. He smiled casually, as though bringing a stranger to our family dinner was completely natural. "Everyone, this is Samantha," he said with a careless tone. "She's a colleague from work." His words hung in the air, but the way he held her hand told a different story. He didn't let go, and his eyes lingered on her in a way that wasn't professional. There was a softness, a quiet affection, that no husband should ever show another woman. Samantha looked around the table, a polite smile on her face, but she leaned into him, as if she belonged there. Silence spread across the room like a wave. My father's fork clattered against his plate, breaking the stillness for just a second. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting from me to Jason and back again. My brother shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while my sister looked down, not knowing where to put her eyes. The children sat frozen, their young faces full of confusion. I felt my entire body go cold. This was my home, my table, my family, and Jason had walked in with another woman as though I didn't even exist. My mind screamed 1,000 questions, but my lips refused to move. I sat there, staring, trying to keep myself from breaking down in front of everyone. Jason didn't seem to notice the tension, or maybe he didn't care. He pulled out a chair for Samantha, the very seat he usually claimed as his own at the table. "Hope you don't mind," he said lightly, his tone dismissive, as if this was just a casual dinner guest. But every small gesture between them, his hand brushing hers, the way he leaned close when she whispered something in his ear, told a truth far different from the one he was presenting. The children's eyes flicked to me, searching for reassurance. I forced a smile I didn't feel, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I wanted to stand up, to scream, to demand answers, but I couldn't. Not there. Not in front of my parents, my siblings, and especially not in front of my kids. The room was heavy with unspoken words. My parents exchanged a worried glance, one full of pity and fear for me. My father's jaw tightened, while my mother's hand moved slowly to rest over mine beneath the table. She didn't say anything, but I felt her silent support. And there, in the middle of what was supposed to be a warm family tradition, I sat watching my husband openly disrespect our marriage in the cruelest way possible, by bringing another woman into the very heart of my home. Samantha slid into the chair right beside Jason, and he stayed close to her, leaning in whenever she spoke. They whispered to each other like teenagers sharing secrets, laughing softly as if the rest of us weren't sitting there watching. Every little giggle felt like a sharp knife against my skin. My family noticed, my children noticed, but no one dared to say anything. I kept my hands busy, serving food onto plates, pretending not to see the way Jason's hand rested lightly on Samantha's arm. My smile was forced, stretched so tight it hurt, but I wore it anyway. I told myself I had to. This was my home, my table, my family. I wouldn't allow him to break me down in front of them. The food was finally being passed around. My mother complimented the roasted chicken. My father commented on how well-seasoned the potatoes were, and my sister said the pies smelled heavenly. I should have felt proud of the hours I'd spent in the kitchen, but Jason's voice cut through the small comfort their words gave me. "You know," he said casually, glancing at Samantha, "Emily makes the same dishes every year. I keep telling her to try something different, but she never listens. Don't you think it's a little boring?" Samantha gave an awkward laugh, her eyes darting between me and Jason, but she didn't pull away from him. Jason grinned as though he'd made some clever joke. The room went quiet. My brother cleared his throat and tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but the damage had been done. Heat rushed to my face, but I kept my voice steady. "I thought everyone enjoyed these meals," I said softly, more to the children than anyone else. My daughter nodded quickly, her little voice chiming in. "I love it, Mommy." That small defense should have warmed me, but instead, it only highlighted how cold Jason had become. He didn't thank me. He didn't acknowledge the effort. Instead, he kept talking to Samantha, asking her about her favorite restaurants, describing dishes he liked as if I wasn't even sitting there. At one point, he said, "You'd love this little Italian place downtown. I should take you sometime." He said it openly, in my house, in front of my family. I felt myself shrinking inside, but I refused to let the tears fall. My parents' faces were tight with anger they were too polite to express. My sister bit her lip, staring at her plate, while my brother looked like he might stand up and say something. But no one moved. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for me to react. I chose silence. For my children's sake, I swallowed the humiliation and held my head as high as I could. They didn't need to see their mother break down at the dinner table. So, I forced myself to keep serving food, to keep talking lightly with my family, as though Jason's cruelty didn't pierce me with every word. Inside, though, I was breaking apart. That night, I understood that the man who once promised to protect me was now the very one tearing me down in front of everyone I loved. What Jason didn't know was that I had already uncovered his lies weeks before that dinner. The late nights at work, the sudden care for his appearance, the way he guarded his phone, it all added up. At first, I tried to push it aside, but then the evidence began to speak louder than my doubts. One night, when he left his jacket hanging over a chair, I found a crumpled receipt in the pocket. It wasn't from a work dinner or a quick meal on the way home. It was from an expensive restaurant, the kind of place we used to visit only on anniversaries. The bill showed 2 entrees, 2 drinks, and a dessert. I knew he hadn't eaten alone. Another time, his phone buzzed on the counter while he was in the shower. I never went through his things before, but something in me reached for it. The message on the screen was short. "I had such a wonderful night. Can't wait to see you again." My heart dropped. I didn't need to see the name to know it wasn't meant for me. Excuses piled up. He worked late more often than not. He claimed he had business trips that never made sense. Sometimes he came home smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. I felt the truth closing in around me, and the more I saw, the more I realized there was no fixing this. But instead of storming into a fight or begging for answers, I chose another path. I stayed calm. I smiled when he walked through the door. I acted as though nothing had changed. All the while, I carried the truth quietly in my chest. I knew if I wanted to protect myself and my children, I had to be careful. I called a lawyer. It was one of the hardest steps I've ever taken, but also one of the most necessary. I explained everything I had found, the receipts, the texts, the nights he didn't come home until long after midnight. The lawyer listened and then helped me understand my options. Together, we began to prepare. Paperwork was filled out, plans were made, and slowly I built the strength I would need for what was coming. Each day, I carried the weight of that secret. Jason had no idea that while he laughed with his mistress or came home with careless excuses, I was planning my escape. I tucked the signed divorce papers safely into a folder, hidden where he would never think to look. It gave me a strange sense of power, knowing I wasn't as helpless as he believed. I waited, not because I was weak, but because timing mattered. I wanted him to face the truth when he least expected it, to feel the weight of what he had thrown away. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't the silent, forgiving wife he thought I was. The papers were ready, and though he had no idea, the day was coming when I would place them in his hands and take back my dignity. When the dinner finally ended, the room felt heavy. My family left quietly, each of them giving me long, worried looks before walking out the door. The children went upstairs, tired from the evening, though I could see confusion written on their faces. The house grew still, and I was left alone with Jason and his arrogance. He leaned back in his chair, one arm lazily draped over the backrest, the other scrolling through his phone as though nothing had happened. Samantha had already gone, leaving behind the faint smell of her perfume that lingered in my living room. Jason didn't look guilty or nervous. Instead, he looked smug, as if he had proven something tonight. Breaking the silence, he said in a casual but sharp tone, "You know, Emily, you could stand to learn a thing or two from Samantha. She knows how to make a man feel appreciated. Not like this." He waved his hand around the room, as though my home, my efforts, my entire being were nothing but a disappointment to him. The words stung, but I didn't flinch. I kept my expression calm, though inside I felt something shift. He kept going, not even looking at me as he said, "If you don't start changing, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Maybe it's time I find someone who understands me." That was the moment, the one I had been waiting for. Instead of breaking down or begging him to stay, I stood up quietly and walked to the desk in the corner of the room. My movements were slow, deliberate. I opened the drawer, pulled out the sealed envelope that had been waiting for this exact moment, and carried it back to the table. Jason watched me with a smirk, clearly convinced I was about to hand him some emotional letter. Maybe an apology, maybe a plea. He leaned forward, amused, and took the envelope from my hands. "What's this?" Finally realizing you've got competition. His laugh was low and mocking. He tore it open with one hand, still smirking, still certain he had the upper hand. But as his eyes scanned the first lines, the smirk vanished. His shoulders stiffened, and the color drained slightly from his face. He looked up at me, confusion and anger mixing together. "These are divorce papers?" he asked, his voice tight. I met his eyes and nodded. My tone was steady, not raised, not emotional. "Yes, Jason. They've been ready for weeks. You've made your choices, and I'm making mine." For once, he had nothing to say. His mouth opened, then closed again, as if he couldn't find the right words. The power he thought he had crumbled in his hands, replaced by the reality he never saw coming. I stood there, calm and unshaken, while he sat with the truth in front of him. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one left speechless. He was. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Jason sat frozen in his chair, the papers shaking slightly in his hands as his eyes moved down the page. His confident smirk was gone, replaced with a pale face and a look of disbelief. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control. He looked at me as though I had just struck him, but I didn't flinch. I stood tall, steady, my hands folded in front of me. My voice was calm when I finally spoke. "You don't get to disrespect me in my own home and think I'll still be waiting for you." The words hung in the air, sharper than any argument I could have thrown at him. Jason blinked, his mouth opening and closing as if he wanted to respond, but nothing came out. The man who had walked into dinner so sure of himself now sat small and speechless at the table where he had once ruled with arrogance. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Samantha shifting uncomfortably. She had been standing awkwardly near the doorway, unsure whether to stay or leave. But the moment she realized what Jason was holding in his hands, her face flushed red. She didn't say a word. She just picked up her purse and muttered a quick, "I should go." Without looking back, she hurried out the door, leaving Jason to face the fallout alone. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating, broken only by Jason's uneven breathing. His fingers gripped the papers tightly, as though if he held them hard enough, they might disappear. Finally, he managed to whisper, "Emily, what is this? You can't be serious." But I was serious. More serious than I had ever been in my life. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't let my anger take over. I simply repeated, "I am done, Jason. You made your choice long before tonight. Now I'm making mine." His face twisted with anger then, a flash of the man who always thought he had the power. "You think you can just," he started, but his voice cracked, and the sentence fell apart. He wasn't the one in charge anymore, and he knew it. I stayed where I was, not raising my voice, not lowering my gaze. My strength came not from anger, but from certainty. For weeks, I had prepared for this moment, and now it was here. Jason finally understood that he hadn't been the one with the upper hand after all. He looked back at the papers, reading the details again, but it didn't matter how many times his eyes ran over the words. The truth remained the same. The marriage he had taken for granted, the wife he had humiliated, the family he had disrespected. All of it was no longer his to control. That night, in the silence of our home, Jason realized that the life he thought he could treat carelessly was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Jason pushed the papers aside, as though setting them down would change what they meant. His voice finally came back, strained and almost desperate. "Emily, please can we talk? Just you and me. Not like this. Not in front of everyone." But I shook my head. "There's nothing left to say in private, Jason. You chose to disrespect me in front of our family, and now you'll hear the truth in front of them too." For a moment, his eyes flicked toward the doorway, where my parents and siblings lingered. They hadn't completely left yet. My father had stepped back inside when he heard the tension rising, and my mother stood close behind him. My brother and sister stayed nearby too, unwilling to let me face this moment alone. Their presence filled me with quiet strength. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Jason's voice rose, desperate now. "Emily, you don't understand." But I cut him off firmly, my words calm but sharp. "No, Jason. I understand more than you think. I've seen the receipts. I've read the messages. I know who you've been with and how long it's been going on. Don't stand here and pretend this is something I don't understand." The room was silent again, except for his uneven breathing. My mother stepped forward then, placing a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was gentle, steadying me. "We're here for you, Emily," she whispered. My father nodded firmly beside her, his jaw tight with anger, but his eyes full of pride at the strength I was showing. My siblings stood close, arms crossed, silent but supportive. Jason looked around, realizing he had lost every ounce of power he once had. No one was on his side. Not me, not the children, not even the family he had once tried to charm. The kids had come down the stairs by then, drawn by the voices. They stood hesitantly at the edge of the room, their wide eyes searching my face. For weeks, they had sensed something was wrong. I had tried to protect them from the truth, keeping my distance, holding in my pain so they wouldn't see me crumble. But now, in this moment, they understood. I knelt down and opened my arms, pulling them close. "I'm okay," I whispered to them, though my heart ached. "I've been trying to keep you safe, to protect you from all of this. But I promise you, things are going to get better now." They clung to me, and I felt their small bodies relax just a little. They didn't need every detail to know the truth. Their mother wasn't weak. She was standing up for herself, for them, and for the home they deserved. Jason stood a few feet away, watching as the family he had once claimed slipped further out of his reach. His begging didn't matter anymore. His excuses didn't matter. The people who mattered most, my children, my family, were standing with me. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Within a few weeks, Jason packed his things and left the house that once held our laughter, our memories, and the family we built together. His footsteps out the door were heavy, but I didn't chase after him. The man who had promised to protect and cherish me had already left long before that night at dinner. By the time he moved out, he was just a shadow of the husband I once knew, and I no longer felt tied to his choices. Word of what happened traveled quickly through the family. Jason's reputation crumbled with every retelling of the story. He was no longer the charming son-in-law my parents had welcomed with open arms. He was the man who brought humiliation into my home, and the respect he once carried was gone. I didn't need to say much. His actions had already revealed who he really was. I filed for divorce quietly but firmly, just as I had prepared to do weeks earlier. The papers moved through the system quickly, and with the support of my lawyer and my family, I secured custody of the children. That was always my priority, making sure they were safe, stable, and protected from the chaos their father had created. For me, it wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to hurt Jason back the way he hurt me. My true victory was choosing peace, choosing to step out of betrayal and into a life where my children and I could finally breathe again. In the evenings, I found myself sitting with them at the dinner table, just the three of us. At first, the empty chair felt like a wound. But as time passed, I realized it was no longer a reminder of what was missing. It was proof of what we had overcome. The laughter slowly returned, the conversations flowed again, and our home began to feel warm instead of heavy. I watched my children closely during those weeks. They were young, but they understood more than I gave them credit for. They saw me stand my ground, they saw me refuse to tolerate disrespect, and they saw me choose dignity over fear. And in those moments, I realized that the most important lesson I had given them wasn't about heartbreak or betrayal. It was about self-respect. They learned that love is not about suffering silently, that staying in a toxic marriage is not strength, and that walking away with your head held high is not failure. It's courage. It's survival. It's teaching them that peace inside your home is worth more than the image of a broken family kept together by pain. As weeks turned into months, I began to feel myself again. Stronger. Independent. No longer defined by Jason's betrayal, but by the way I chose to rise from it. My life didn't end when my marriage did. It began again on my terms. And in that freedom, I finally understood. The real revenge was never about punishing Jason. It was about reclaiming my life, showing my children what true strength looks like, and proving that betrayal could break my heart, but it would never break me.